Welcome. Good afternoon. It's afternoon, yeah?
Good afternoon.
Okay, and it's Wednesday. Okay. Welcome to the W.E.B. Du Bois Center, and thank you all for coming at the end-ish of the semester. So we really appreciate you turning out. My name is Whitney Battle Baptiste. I am the director of the W.E.B. Du Bois Center and a professor in the Department of Anthropology here at UMass. It's the Du Bois Center. I want to just do a very quick introduction of an amazing Du Bois fellow that we've had here, and Matheus Gato de Jesus. I said that in Spanish.
Yes.
And he is a professor in the Department of Sociology at UNICAM.
Yes.
He is a coordinator and researcher of the Afro-Nucleus CEBRAP.
CEBRAP. Yes.
Yeah. He holds a master's and doctorate from University of Sao Paulo. He was a visiting researcher at Princeton University in New Jersey and Harvard, somewhere in Massachusetts. He is currently a visiting researcher at the Du Bois Center here at UMass Amherst, the flagship. He is author and editor of several books and articles whose main themes are racism, racial classifications, racial violence, Black intellectuals, literature, and post-abolition. He is author of, I'm going to say this in English, The Massacre of Freedmen's, About Race and Republic. And that was in 2020. He is the winner of the award for Best Scientific Work from the National Association for Research in Social Sciences and a finalist for the Djibouti Prize. Please, round of applause, welcome Professor Gato de Jesus.
Thank you very much, Whitney, for this beautiful introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank Adam Rhodes, Augustin Laumontes, Amilcar Shabazz for being here and for sharing some of the results of the research I conducted as a Du Bois Fellow in the summer of 2025. I would also like to acknowledge the environment of exchange and the friendship with my colleagues here, Kimberly Harris, Scott Henkel, and Phil Sanitier, from whom I learned so much. One of the recent developments in humanities curricula in Brazil over the past 4 years has been the slow but steady reception of W.E.B. Du Bois. Entire courses centered on the Du Bois thought have been offered at universities such as University of Brasilia, Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, the Federal University of São Carlos, and the State University of Campinas. The Department of Sociology at the later University, Campinas, has been discussing and studying the feasibility of offering a course entirely dedicated to the author within its permanent effective curriculum. This is also due to the translation of W.E.B. Du Bois' writings into Portuguese. In 2021, the publisher, Editora Veneta, republished The Souls of Black Folk, whose first Portuguese edition had been out of print for many years. In 2023, the classical work Urban Sociology, The Philadelphia Negro, was released by Editora Autêntica, and last year saw the publication of The Negro Church by Editora Recriar. I will show to you some of that publications. So this is the cover of the Negro Church. 3 other publications have also appeared within a short period of time. In October of 2025, the Portuguese translation of Dark Water, Voices from Within the Veil, reshaped Brazilian bookstores. In March 2026, it was followed by Black Reconstruction in America. And in April, just last month, Dusk of Dawn was published. So I will show to you. So this is Dusk of Dawn in the Brazilian translation. I coordinated that. This is Água Escura. I also organized that. This is Dark Water. This is Black Reconstruction, and I also organized this many editions. It is also worth highlighting initiatives such as the Du Bois Project, in Portuguese, Projeto Du Bois. Du Bois Project, carried out by Nucleus Afro-CEBRAP, likely the largest effort to promote the reception of W.E.B. Du Bois thought outside the United States. As we will see later, the Du Bois Project has been involved in several of the publications mentioned. Among its achievements in a dossier entirely dedicated to Du Bois in Revista Cult, the oldest and most prestigious cultural magazine in the country. I will show to you. So this is the dossier I have organized it in Revista Cult. In Revista Cult. It is also includes its partnership with scientific dissemination platform Nexo Políticas Públicas, which aims to ensure accessible tests produced by professors and the graduate students for pedagogical use in the classroom and to enhance the quality of public debate in the press. So I will show to you too. This is the platform. You have several small tests and videos about W.E.B. Du Bois. I think now we have like 20 tests, like for the professors to apply in classroom and so. The context encourages us to revisit, in the case of W.E.B. Du Bois, Stuart Hall question about the reception of Frantz Fanon in the 90s. Why Du Bois? Why now? In general, the most common explanation for Du Bois' absence from the Brazilian academic debate has been the fact that his work is written in English. Yet the use of texts in foreign languages is widespread in graduate programs, especially in the most elite humanities courses in the country. The issue is also puzzling, given the Brazilian universities' ongoing dialogue with American academia, the importance of the racial question in Brazilian social thought, the vibrance of public debates on race, and the centrality attributed to Du Bois by key figures in contemporary social theory, such as Paul Gilroy, Nancy Fraser, Stuart Hall, thinkers who are widely known in Brazil. In this sense, it is important to highlight some elements that have historically turned the reception of W.E.B. Du Bois in Brazil into an impasse. First, there is his erasure from the history of the social sciences, truly documented in the Scholar Denied by Aldo Morris. Du Bois, together with his team at the Sociology Laboratory at Atlanta University, was the first scholar to establish a school of sociological thought in the United States, grounded in systematical empirical research on the so-called Negro problem. However, as you know, the sociological orientation of his work, critical of theories of black biological inferiority, racial segregation laws, and closely connected to political activism, led the systematic political boycott of his findings in the results. As a consequence, the Chicago School of Sociology, organized by Robert Park and his disciples, became the dominant force in the American narrative about the formation of sociology and the legitimated scientific discourse in the field they termed race relations. This prevalent perspective reshaped Brazil through the work of American sociologist
Donald Pearson, in his book Brancos e Pretos na Bahia, exerting a decisive influence on the formation of the field on Brazilian social sciences in general and on the studies of the racial question in particular. Thus, the inclusion of Du Bois in the process of institutionalization of sociology in the United States was one of the factors that erased him as a reference for Brazilian social sciences. In another direction, W.E.B. Du Bois' dialogue with Black Brazilians movements and the circulation of his ideas in the Brazilian press during the first half of 20th century were overshadowed by the figure of his rival, Booker T. Washington, whose orientation was considerably more conservative. In a recent article, the historian Lívia Maria Tiede, my friend, documents that Washington was enthusiastically cited in the Brazilian press as the most intelligent Negro in America. And José Correa Leite, it was a very important Brazilian Black militant in the Black movement. José Correa Leite, a leading figure in São Paulo Black press, referred to Washington as one of the greatest leaders in the world. Moreover, Washington's autobiography, Up from Slavery, was published in Brazil as Memórias de Negro, was translated in the 40s by none other than Graciliano Ramos, one of Brazil's most prominent literary figures. Third, as shown by the research of Juliana Goss and Jorge Daniel Vasquez, W.E.B. Du Bois was among the Black intellectuals for whom Brazil represented an alternative to U.S. racial model, and his writings on the subject helped circulate in United States the idea of Brazil as a racial paradise. Du Bois never traveled to Brazil and was therefore unable to establish direct contact with Afro-Brazilian Black political leaders. His critique of theories of racial and biological degeneration of the mixed race populations also contributed to his optimism view of what was seen as the country of racial mixing, Brazil. The Brazilian intellectuals with whom W.E.B. Du Bois engaged, such as Gilberto Freire and Arthur Ramos, also reinforced this direction. However, even when Du Bois came to adopt a different view of Brazil and became critical of the ideology of whitening, this did not lead to establishment of a bridge of a dialogue with Black social movements in Brazil or Black intellectuals in Brazil directly. But even more important than the aspects mentioned above is the fact that W.E.B. Du Bois never abandoned the effort to formulate a sociological concept of race. In his seminal article, The Conservation of Races, 1897, he presents his first in the well-known definition of the concept as, quotations, a vast family of human beings, generally of a common blood and language, always of a common history, traditions, and impulses, who are both voluntarily and involuntarily striving together for the accomplishment of a certain more less vividly conceived ideals of life. End quotes. This notion reveals an attempt to shift the interpretation of race away from biological determinism toward the historical formation of groups. Races would be, above all, historical races. This perspective toward a historical and sociological conceptualization became more radical over the time as the scientific legitimacy of theories of innate genetic superiority or inferiority among human groups progressively declined. In Dusk of Vidal, as you know, W.E.B. Du Bois arrives at the following formulation, quotes, "But what is the group? How do you distinguish it? And how can you call it Negro when you admit it is not? I recognize it quite easily and with full legal certainty. A Negro is a person who must ride Jim Crow in Georgia." End quotes. In other words, Negro is a term that names a shared social experience. Du Bois' persistent and polemical insistence on the indispensable need to develop a historical concept of race, one capable of understanding and confronting colonial and racial regimes of domination, specifying the nature and cultural meaning of violence against Africans and their descendants across multiple diasporas, and at the same time fostering transnational political solidarity among Black populations, helped seal a significant part of the silence surrounding the work of W.E.B. Du Bois in Brazil during the second half of the 19th century. The scourge of Nazism and fascism during the Second World War, along with the formulation of an anti-racist agenda led by prominent Jewish intellectuals in the humanities and the philosophy, such as Claude Lévi-Strauss and Hannah Arendt, condemned any political or analytical engagement with the concept of race in the post-war years. This was precisely the period of institutionalization of Brazilian social science in the 50s and 60s. I believe this is the main reason why when an author such as W.E.B. Du Bois did not stimulate robust editorial projects around his work in Brazil, nor became a canonical reference in the humanities throughout the second half of the 19th century. Not by a chance, the few references to W.E.B. Du Bois that we find in Brazilian social thought were made by Black intellectuals active in the universities and in social movements as well, opposing the Brazilian military dictatorship for whom racial solidarity should be mobilized as a means of demanding social and collective rights from the state. This is the case of Eduardo Oliveira, who cites Du Bois in his research, Black Political Movements in Early 20th Century in Brazil and the United States, conducted between 1972 and 1974. The author had traveled several times to the United States. The author had traveled several times to the United States and owned Du Bois' books, in addition to being familiar with his intellectual trajectory. Oliveira refers to works by Du Bois that are still little known in Brazil today, such as his doctoral dissertation, The Suppression of the African Slave Trade, as well as his unfinished project to build an Encyclopedia Africana during the final years of his life in Ghana. Another author who cites Du Bois is Lélia Gonzalez. In the very first paragraphs of her article, A Mulher Negra na Sociedade Brasileira, The Black Woman in Brazilian Society, uma abordagem política econômica, an approach economic political economic, 1979, in her discussion of the relationship between the slave trade and the growth of the population of Africans and their descendants in the Portuguese colony. Du Bois is also included among the references of the classic Pan-Africanist manifest by Abdias do Nascimento, O Quilombismo, the Quilombism, 1981. Documents from the State Seminar on Political Training of MNU São Paulo. MNU is Black Movement Unified. Movimento Negro Unificado. Held on October of 1997, are preserved in the Reginaldo Bispo collection at the Edgar Lorenhut Archive at Unicamp. Mention Du Bois under the topic African resistance, nationalism, and the Black movement, end quotes. Thus, it is possible to say that Du Bois, although little known, was an important reference within the intellectual and political circuits of Brazilian Black movements. If I may add a personal note, as the child of Black activists from the 80s and have grown up surrounded by people engaged in the anti-racist struggle, I remember fighting in the libraries of some of my aunts and uncles the book The Souls of Black Folk, the only translation of Du Bois available in the country for many years. The contrast with the silence of the social science is striking. By the late 90s, one of the few analytical tests available in Portuguese on the work of W.E.B. Du Bois for students of anthropology and sociology was the second chapter of In My Father's House by African philosopher Kwame Anthony Appiah, titled The Illusions of Race. The text condemns any form of racialism, including the sociological use of the concept of race, and it classifies as intrinsic racists all social movements that seek to claim collective rights on the basis of racial belonging. Its reading of Du Bois identifies him Its reading of Du Bois identifies in him the intellectual genealogy of these serious and consequential errors. This orientation gained strength within a significant part of Brazilian social science, which made anti-racialism the intellectual backbone of the campaign against quota policies and affirmative action for Black students in Brazilian universities in the late 90s and the first decade of the 21st century. Another academic reading of W.E.B. Du Bois became possible through the translation of The Black Atlantic, Modernity and Double Consciousness by the sociologist Paul Gilroy, published in 2001 by Editora 34 in Brazil. In addition to a long and beautiful writing chapter entirely dedicated to Du Bois' trajectory, the work is grounded in the notion of double consciousness, one of Du Bois' most original concepts. The examination of social theory of modernity through the lenses and lived experience of Black intellectuals resonated within the expectations of Black researchers and the students engaged in the defense of affirmative action in the quota policies who sought to challenge the racial status quo in Brazilian universities and the Eurocentrism of social science curriculum. An important milestone in this process was the 5th Congress of Black Researchers held in Goiânia in 2006, whose theme was Black Thought and Anti-Racism. Within these alternative spheres of intellectual legitimacy, the works of authors such as James Baldwin, Bell Hooks, Patricia Hill Collins, Audre Lorde, and W.E.B. Du Bois were already circulating years before Brazil's traditional publishing market showed a significant interest in them. Intellectual currents that have become increasingly present in Brazilian university life, in Brazilian university life, such as Black feminism, post-colonial and decolonial theory, Black Marxism, as well as concepts like diaspora, intersectionality, and Black modernism, found in these gatherings of Black researchers their first space of intellectual and political reception. About 15 years ago, I was there. I was a student, but I was there. About 15 years ago, when the 5th Congress of Black Researchers took place, it was extremely difficult to find even a single text by Lélia Gonzalez. There were no Portuguese translations of Audre Lorde. In the universities, there were debates about whether it was even relevant to read Milton Santos, is a famous Brazilian geographer, as a Black intellectual or not. Most Brazilian editions of the novels by James Baldwin were out of print and required long searches through second-hand bookstores to obtain a copy. No books by Bell Hooks existed in Portuguese. Guerreiro Ramos, an important Black sociologist, Guerreiro Ramos was even more marginal than he is today in social science curriculum. The Brazilian edition of Black Skin, White Masks by Frantz Fanon was clumsy and full of serious errors. And we did not yet know that Beatriz Nascimento, other very important Black woman in the historian, had left behind, in addition to her seminal essays on Quilombos, Marronage, on Quilombos, and the Black agency in history, numerous poems and writings on artistic and cultural criticism. In the case of W.E.B. Du Bois, as I told you, the only book published in Brazil under the title The Souls of Black Folk had been out of print for many years. This set of difficulties revealed, among other things, the entanglement of race, intellectual canon formation, and the construction of academic curricula to which my own generation of young Black university students was subject. Organized in student collectives, we stood together in support of the democratization of public universities and in defense of quota policies and affirmative action during the first decade of the century. Perhaps this explains why many of us, as soon as an academic position became possible, became engaged in rethinking the curricula of our respective fields of teaching and research. This problem was the starting point for the creation of the Du Bois Project, which I direct at the Núcleo Afro-CEBRAP, Brazilian Center for Analysis and Planning. Its aim is to strengthen academic research and foster formative dialogue around the work of the African-American sociologist W.E.B. Du Bois in Brazil through the organization of books, videos, courses, thematic dossiers in specialized journals, technical reviews, and translation of his work into Portuguese, as I showed to you. Such a conception and organization of this work breaks with the barriers that separate research, teaching, and engagement with the broader community in academic practice by producing outputs and results grounded in dynamic relationship among these three dimensions. This question of the fundamentally collective character of intellectual work in general and of scientific production in particular was a lesson that depended through the research and guided readings carried out by the team of the Du Bois Project, with a view to the translation and publication of the book The Negro Church by W.E.B. Du Bois, published in Brazil by Editora Recriar, I showed to you. Although the specialized literature on this book, on this work, tends to highlight almost exclusively the protagonism of W.E.B. Du Bois, okay, he's protagonist, it drew our attention that the text contains chapters and sections entirely written by the written by older researchers associated with the Atlanta School, such as Kyle Miller and Richard Wright Jr., as well as the presence of the sociologist Annie Marion McLean. The edition also included the program and the resolutions of the 80th Conference on Negro Problems, organized by the Sociology Laboratory at the Atlanta University, for which the book had been prepared. In the feature, excerpts from lectures by important social reformers, such as Washington Gladden and the renowned Black activist Mary Church Terrell. In this sense, not only is the text itself better understood as a polyphonic and plural arrangement of voices, but it also requires a more nuanced understanding of the reformist and engaged character of its premises and conclusions. Such a framing reveals not only the ideologies and the values of the researchers involved in that enterprise, but also that the social space opened by reformist activism at the end of the 19th century provide some of the social conditions of a possibility for the circulation of the research techniques that were beginning to shape the field of the social sciences. Another unexpected possibility for knowledge production and teaching emerged during the reading and the preparation of notes for the first Portuguese translation of Darkwater, Voices from Within the Veil, prepared by Fósforo Editora. I think this is the first translation in another language than English in the world. We don't have this in French, in Spanish, and in other things. The first thing that stood out was the centrality of the notion of the veil in the truth of W.E.B. Du Bois across very different phases of his intellectual trajectory. This point is important since the limited reception of the African American sociologists in Brazil is inextricably linked to the publication of the Black Atlantic Modernity and Double Consciousness by Paul Gilroy. In this now classic work of contemporary social theory, the concept of double consciousness structures its main arguments. However, the systematic collective reading of Du Bois' books, along with the preparation of courses, the same time for the undergraduate social science students at the University of Campinas, made evident the gradual disappearance of the idea of double consciousness in the text, like a citation, alongside the persistence of the notion of the veil. Indeed, by the time he wrote Dark Water, Du Bois had already experienced the horrors of the First World War and reflected on the racial implications of its imperialist character. He had been filled with hope by the Russian Revolution, witnessed the racial lynchings during the so-called Red Summer, draw closer to socialist currents and thought of Karl Marx, and followed developments in the biological sciences and the evolution of genetics through Mendelian inheritance. He was increasingly thinking about the correlation between racial conflicts and the organization of modern capitalism. The question was no longer only how to be black and American, of double consciousness in the sense of his original formulation, but rather the exploitation and oppression of dark worlds across Africa, the Americas, and Asia. Even more interesting than the conceptual discussions were those concerning the meaning of racial classifications in the W.E.B. Du Bois' work, especially because the author's autobiography descriptions of his own trajectory challenged simplistic oppositions between systems of racial categorization in the United States and Brazil. The speculative nature of such oppositions reveals more about the intellectual exchange involved in deciphering the cultural meaning of race in these two countries than about the symbolic operation of racism and its transformations in each context. Indeed, in Du Bois' writings, particularly in Dusk of Dawn, the importance of color as a factor of hierarchy, both within and beyond the black community, stands out, as does his description of his father as a light-skinned mulatto. The fact that his classmate at Harvard University found it amusing that someone as light-skinned as he was would see himself as an authentic black leader. The racial passing undertaken by part of his family with whom he subsequently lost contact, and his account of racial humiliation in Berlin while attending lectures by Heinrich von Treitsch. These passages resonated strongly with the students, particularly amid debates on fraud in racial quota selection process in Brazil, the issue of colorism, and the ambiguities surrounding the social position of those categorized as pardos, here like brown. We call pardos. The translation of Black Reconstruction in America also arrives at an important political moment. On the one hand, there has been a resurgence of labor practices considered analogous to slavery in contemporary labor markets. On the other, the growing strength of the far right among popular sectors, particularly among informal and low-wage workers. This context is traditionally interpreted in Brazil as a kind of archaic survival within societies shaped by colonialism and slavery, take as evidence that capitalism, understood as a liberalizing force, has not yet been sufficiently developed in Brazil and the other context of the global South. It is not even seen as a constitutive element illustrating backwardness, undevelopment, or dependent and peripheral character of such economies. Within these frameworks, the violence of racialization is not understood as constitutive of capitalism as such, of its formation and social history, but rather as a feature of peripheral nations, overseas states, whose destiny, at least in public discourse, is to remain confined to a perpetual state of development until modernity fulfills south of the equator its civilizational and metropolitan promises. It is precisely this set of positions and the approach that the sociological analysis of capitalism developed in Black Reconstruction in America helps to problematize. For W.E.B. Du Bois, the U.S. context in the mid-19th century revealed that race had become a means of constituting a cheap labor force and producing disposable subhumans, and that slave labor and other forms of servitude were a constitutive and inextricable part of capitalist development, not an archaic, primitive, or traditional past. More importantly, this articulation became evident precisely with the rise of industrial capitalism rather than be eliminated by its triumph. The many combinations of servile practices in the capitalist production in the Brazilian economy may thus find in Du Bois a fundamental interlocutor. To conclude, I would like to emphasize that the reception of W.E.B. Du Bois' work in Brazil in recent years is related to at least two distinct factors. On the one hand, it is connected to the set of opportunities opened up by the social struggles for the democratization of Brazilian universities, intensified by racial quota policies. The diversification and the popularization of the university, combined with the political mobilization of Black students' collectives, had made explicit the racial hierarchies that organize the Eurocentrism of academic curricula and shape the disciplinary canonization of works, authors, and theories. The second important factor is the international reassessment of Du Bois' work as that of a classical and foundational author in sociology as an academic discipline. This shift has made it possible to examine a range of his original contributions in the fields such as anthropology and sociology of religion, studies of violence and crime, histories of emancipation and abolition process, the political theory of democracy, the history and sociology of war, analysis of social conservatism, the sociology of culture, the history of Marxism, class analysis, and other fundamental themes in social sciences. Finally, it is worth noting that in my own professional trajectory, the set of initiatives around the work of W.E.B. Du Bois, rather than merely an effort to promote the reception of a single author, as it initially emerged, has become a space for experimentation on the possibilities of combining teaching with research, using appropriate media to produce knowledge beyond the university and training new researchers. Within the specific field of the social science, This means taking advantage of the opportunities opened up by ongoing social struggles, still without a clear resolution, in favor of a more diverse and popular university, so that teaching and research practices may critically engage with the hierarchies that shape disciplinary canon formation and ultimately live up to their claims of academic excellence. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I do want to open it up for questions. If anyone has questions, please.
Please in Portuguese, no.
Did some elements of Brazil protest or reject the idea of Du Bois when it began to, go to universities and things? Was there a problem with let's say, the government or some of the other groups of people?
I think we have different kinds of problem. So I think we have a conservative position of some professors about the connection between research and activism, and this is a main point for Du Bois. Another point is race is still a polemical conception to work in sociology. And I think another point is the Eurocentrism itself, because Du Bois changed not only the narrative of sociology in the United States, he changed the narrative of sociology in the whole Americas, for Brazil, for Colombia, for United States, for Canada, because you have to explain how this kind of new modern societies of the 19th century emerged from the colonialism and slavery too. So it's like it's a challenge for the traditional formation in my field. I think that's this.
Is Du Bois taught in like the undergrad programs of sociology in Brazil?
Now, yes, I and other professors starting to give a class about Du Bois in post graduation, but for the undergraduate students too. And I have to talk with you about it. I try to organize the fables. Do you know Du Bois? Du Bois wrote a lot of fables. Yes, he's wrote in different types. So I try to organize 5 fables he write in 1920 to build a book for kids. Because it's a book for kids. I illustrated book for kids. So you can put Du Bois in different kinds of. We have to talk about this.
I was wondering, it seems like you're talking about Du Bois as being read and kind of embraced by, in terms of the university, African resistance as well as Black movements in Brazil. So you have people who, I just see it that the folks at the university level that are wanting to is Du Bois more accepted in terms of Black movement at the university, like professors or faculty? Would they be more likely to have read Du Bois as opposed to just general population? But also, I'm saying, and you're talking about Sao Paulo, if the university is free,
Yes.
but there's a lottery, and the lottery only brings in people that look a certain way, then that means that's why you need affirmative action, etc. But Black movements, people within Black movements know Du Bois. So it seems like there's a possibility of these two groups being familiar with Du Bois,
Yes.
but in general in the country is not familiar with Du Bois.
Yes, in general, yes, you are totally right. So in general, the Black movement accept and engage with Du Bois' work first, like in the 70s,
Okay.
in the 80s. For my professors, Du Bois came by Apia.
Oh, okay.
Not in his own words. He came from Apia. So the Black movements accept more and engaged more in Du Bois ideas. But the fact that Du Bois is American intellectual have some resistance to. Have some resistance to, because we try to shape the Afro-Brazilian thought tradition too, and they say why you do these whole translations about Du Bois, and what about Beatriz Nascimento, and what about Lélia Gonzalez, and what about our own tradition? You have Matheus, you don't have nothing to say about, and they say yes, I have big research about black Afro-Brazilian thought too. But I think Du Bois is important in a different level, and because for the field of social science in general. So Du Bois is someone who everyone have to answer, because religion, the field of sociology of religion have to answer. If you put Du Bois, everybody have to give you an answer to you. You put Black Reconstruction, the white Marxists have to say, oh my God, I have to read this now and give you understand what I try to say?
So you think that one second. So you think that by being introduced to Du Bois through Apia because he's Ghanaian, he was more accepted?
No. This introduction Du Bois by Apia because the anti-racialist frame.
Okay.
Is the point of your anti-racialist frame? Yes.
Okay.
Is the point? Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, that question brought up here that was important that you have been introduced to Du Bois through Apia, who's a critic of Du Bois, who's against the very notion of race. It's a conservative African, and so it raised also the question about the reception of Du Bois, the differential reception. I'm thinking at people like Fabio Nogueira that is engaging Du Bois in order to advance a project of Black Marxism in Brazil.
Yes.
There is a debate about the reception of Du Bois in Brazil.
Yes. Sure. Yes. So starting a debate because the books were not disponible for that. So because that the first step is to have the book, to have this kind of multiple perspective. But now you Flávio Nogueira and the others Black Brazilian intellectuals try to organize the Black Marxist tradition in Brazil, connecting figures like Clóvis Moura and the W.E.B. Du Bois. So like this kind of exchange between the U.S. Black Marxism and the Brazilian Black Marxism too. But I think that's my point of view. I think for all these debates was important to put the university on the center of the discussion. So that's my effort, like to build this kind of books, to organize, to prepare, to organize like technical readings, notes, a lot of notes, like my postface about my postface about Dark Water have like 100 pages, like it's a book connect to another to another book, because you have to do a really introduction of the a strong introduction of the author. So I think the university is like the central of this kind of battles. Thank you.
I remember a couple of years ago, I gave a speech at the National Sociological Association of Brazil.
Yes.
You were there. And I was very glad because I spoke about the Du Bois turn in American US sociology, and the reception was very positive. You know, I didn't feel the level of resistance that
Yes.
I expected that it could happen.
Yes. But in that case, you always have the point when one thing is the way when this kind of event are receiving someone came from outside the country who have a lot of prestigious like Agustin Lamontes and the people who was his students like me in the past. So I think they are more resistant than they are able to say.
So they're accepting of Agustin Lamontes saying it as opposed to anybody saying it.
The other thing, Matheus, is the whole debate. I mean, how are you starting the debate about whether Du Bois changed his view of racial democracy, etc.? Is that I get to be another point
Yes.
of
Yes.
discussion, no?
Yes. Julian always have a important article about in George Vasquez.
Yeah.
So he changed his perception, but he's not able to dialogue with the black intellectuals in Brazil. But George are doing a very interesting research about iron digs.
Yes.
Because iron digs went to Brazil in the 50s and the 60s. But we need.
So is Irene Diggs acknowledged in Brazilian anthropology?
No.
Oh.
No.
She's not even acknowledged in U.S. anthropology.
Yes. What we know about her is because she had to struggle about a fact of racism in a hotel in Rio de Janeiro. But I never had opportunity to read any articles or any research she did. I start to engage with Irene Diggs' writings when I was here in the field giving to me the introduction she did for the Dusk of Dawn.
Yeah.
So that you have to
Yes.
feel to me. But it's not.
But I feel like Jorge is the only
person.
It's the
Jorge is the only
first
person in the
to
world.
and so and her papers are in Baltimore at Morgan State. And
Yes.
so, at a historically black college where she had most of her career.
Yes.
And she was never acknowledged in the US as one of our pioneers in Cuba, Brazil. I mean, she was fluent in Portuguese, Spanish, and African American vernacular English.
Yes. But she had a kind of circulation among the black black movement and of Brazil. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Problem for someone from the 50s or 60s. No. She was a person in Brazilian black movement because she had conversations with these people for doing research in Brazil, but it's difficult to persevere. It's clear. Everybody understand what I'm saying? Oh, good.
So I want to say that thank you again for coming.
Thank you.
It is it's a cloudy day, but but I feel so much brighter because we have seen all of the ways in which Matheus has helped Brazil to get so much more from Du Bois than ever before. So thank you so much. And again, thank you for